Welcome back to Racing Debate here on Sky Sports Racing. I've got Mr. Chapman with me here in the studio. We had a lot of passion there just before the break about whether jockeys should be able to manage their own weight.
When it came to a debate about eating, Sean, we would be absolutely on top of it here. We only need Weaver in here as well, and we could be the best experts on earth. We know how to eat. We do.
We don't necessarily know what is involved in managing your weight as a competitive rider. One man who does, because he's ridden but gone on to an illustrious academic career, probably the foremost expert, I'd say, in this field that I could find in the country to speak to. And I'm delighted he joins us. Is Dr. George Wilson from John Moores University up in Liverpool. Welcome, George. Thank you for joining us. First of all, just give us a bit of perspective. What are jockeys doing at the moment in this country? What are we asking of them, and how are they making the weight to do what we're asking?
Yeah, well, good morning, fellas, and thanks for inviting us on the show. It's a privilege, and also it's a great forum for me maybe to shine some light on the evidence-based research. To answer your question, Sean, as you say, as you know, it's cultural weight-making methods, and jockeys have been doing the same things since Dick Dock, since racing began in the 17th century, because there's always been an emphasis on trying to make very, very light weights for people. And the most common way of doing that is dehydration. Your body's 2/3 water. It's a very, very quick way to reduce weight quickly. Your weight can naturally shift 5, 6, 7 pounds in a day anyway. If you're sweating heavy and you're not replacing the fluids. So that would be the most common method, really. And then there's obviously food deprivation, starvation. And unfortunately, there would be some more sorts of deleterious practices, which we've all heard about, which is a term called flipping, or, self-induced vomiting, which obviously is not great for anyone, because you're going to get, acid reflux, your teeth are going to rot, potential for esophageal cancers and your lesions in your throat, your blood pressure is going to drop. So, whereas I would say that as sort of, it came from America actually, but that's actually sort of been, I don't really hear that much about that now. It still does go on, unfortunately, today. Yeah. But to answer your question, dehydration would be typically the most common method for reducing your weight quickly.
Matt's touched on that in saunas and the use of saunas. Is there harm? Is there evidence, I should say, actually, George, is there evidence of harm managing your weight through dehydration, whether it's short-term or long-term impacts?
Well, short-term, in rapid weight loss, so I've undertaken a study where we sweated jockeys in 2 conditions, one in a sweatsuit for 45 minutes, and then asked them to perform a simulated race ride over 2 miles, and also do some strength testing. And the other condition was where they ran without the sweatsuit, and the evidence was clear. Strength was compromised significantly, and pushing frequency in the last 2 furlongs of the race was compromised significantly. Also, reaction time, there was a tendency to show a reduction in reaction time. We got quite clever. We actually put a button on a whip, and we were having these dots flash across the screen. You had to switch them on and off, and there was a tendency to see a reduction in reaction time. So certainly strength and power were compromised by running for 45 minutes in a sweatsuit, compared to doing the same thing, riding a race without the sweatsuit. And now, considering a horse race is won by 3 pixels of a photograph, if I was a trainer, I'd say, well, I'd rather have you in a hydrated condition than in a dehydrated condition.
Yeah, and potentially safety impacted, reaction times and so on are impacted. Matt's made the point, though, that jockeys have competed in this state for generations, and some of our top riders will have had to use some of these methods, and it doesn't appear to have impacted their performance. And of course, performances for very short bursts of time. This is not like somebody going out and running a marathon or a long bike ride or anything like that. They're short bursts of activity, and they seem to be able to manage it.
Yeah, well, from an ethical point of view, the ethics committee would only allow us to dehydrate them by 2%. We all know jockeys will reduce body mass by a lot more than that. Okay. And I've actually published a study where a jockey reduced body mass by 7% and ended up in Fazakli Hospital in Liverpool after the entry meeting in a terrible condition. And there was also a high-profile case where a jockey passed out during the race over the jumps recently. And his blood pressure was that low, they thought he internally bled. And it turned out it's just that he dehydrated himself by about 10 pounds in about, a few hours. So there are the athlete welfare concerns, and the evidence is there. The chronic situation with long-term dehydration is things like kidney stones, because you get a rise in calcium because you're always trying to go to the toilet, and then you get a build-up of calcium, and obviously we've all had the kidney stones. So there are the downsides of that. And also, you know, mental health, I've reported on, you know, impaired mood states, because if you're starving and sweating, you're not going to feel the best anyway. But I do take Matt's point, and I do take the jockey's point. At the end of the day, there would be an argument, look, you know, we're adults, we can do this ourselves. But where I suppose I come from, it would be that the evidence is there. We'll tell you what it does to you, and then it's down to yourself. But I suppose the industry itself can't be seen to be condoning people dropping £10 in a sauna in 3 hours. That would be the counter argument.
But George, I think what you've just said there is absolutely the crux of the matter. Like, no one's going to argue with your science, because you clearly know what you're talking about. The Jockeys Association have spoken to you. They know that you know what you're talking about. But you would hazard a guess that boxers would be told, if you hit each other in the head, there is a chance that you're not going to be doing yourselves a great service. But they go into the ring and box. That is their decision. Surely in this case, and I know it's so easy for the BHA to throw the card, well, we have to be seen to be doing something. But for me, they are doing something if they go to someone like you and you make your services available. Any rider who wants that information should be able to come to you. And if that is paid for by the BHA, then that, for me, would be providing the service. But the problem comes whereby, let's take a jockey who has no weight problems at all, doesn't go into the sauna ever, but just perhaps on one occasion has to ride at £1 lower than his normal weight. And so for that day, when he arrives at the racetrack, he wants to go into the sauna for 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, rather than sit in a sweatsuit in the car onto the way to the track. That, for me, seems perfectly OK. And your example, I understand extreme examples, but, you know, obviously if there are jockeys trying to knock off £10 and dehydrate £10 a day, we have to stop that. And if any other jockey knows a jockey who's doing that, they should be telling someone and saying, look, this guy, they should be going to their trainer they're riding for and saying this guy, because they would be doing them a disservice if they didn't. But in general terms, I can't see anything wrong with there being a sauna on a racetrack for the jockey who needs to knock off £1 or £2 just before a race.
Well, first, we're actually funded by the Racing Foundation, so I have to thank them for that, because, which is brilliant. Without that, I mean, Tansy and Rob there have been unbelievable, and the previous PGA head, Paul Struthers, was instrumental in sustaining this funding, because it is a great service for the jockeys. And as I said to you, you know, a lot of them are my mates, and you know, everyone knows Franny Norton is a huge part of this for Liverpool John Moores University. He's a conduit for us and the jockeys. But Matt, going back to your point, you know, obviously emotions are running really, really high here on both sides. And I really, really feel for the jockeys, because there's no other sport where you have to make weight every day. So there's lots of issues surrounding this. And we have to have a sit-down, grown-up debate about racing weights per se. Because when you're asking people who are getting bigger to do ridiculously low weights, regardless of, you know, saying we got the science or we're going to try and police it, people will do silly things. Now, at the moment, the sauna isn't policed. You can go in and out as much as you want. And, you know, I've seen people in the weighing room. I've done it myself. You know, I rode as a conditional in 85 and I dropped £10 for my first ride in about 3 days. I felt terrible. I shouldn't have been near a racecourse, never mind ride all the jumps. So I've actually done it. But we're trying to educate and say, you know, lads, and it is the lads, you know, I never see dehydrated girls coming to see me. One point I will make, which is really interesting, and it's not taking sides, but with the £3 allowance for COVID, for the first time, I have got evidence, which you haven't published, where jockeys are coming to me to be tested and they are hydrated. And typically I would see male jockeys, typically male flat jockeys, dehydrated when they're coming to see me. Now in 2021, I looked at my data and I've got 25 jockeys who were in and 21 were male jockeys. And I only saw 2 dehydrated. Now, previous to that, I would typically see the majority of, well, certainly higher numbers than that,
that's
dehydrated.
Just to jump, because we're a little short on time, George, that's with the £3 COVID allowance. We're getting a £2 rise in the weights. Is that going to be sufficient? And if not, based on the data that you have about the physiology of the current cohort of jockeys, what do we need to do? What would weights need to rise by to make this a sustainable thing for jockeys to do?
Well, in summary on that, I've published again. I've said 8'4" should be the minimum weight, based upon the apprentice research where we had, only one apprentice that was a 70-odd could make minimum weight. And that's in line with other countries like New Zealand and Australia. The minimum entry height for a flat jockey should be 166 centimetres, again, based upon the data. With the £3 COVID allowance, I have seen hydrated jockeys coming to see me rather than dehydrated. Show me the evidence that a horse carrying this extra weight would be impaired, and I may change my mind on the whole thing. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying the jockeys do seem to be happier and coming to see me in a more hydrated state, but it just needs a sit-down, grown-up conversation. And perhaps we can aim, I'll summarise on this, to individualised minimum weights for each jockey, tested annually through a DEXA scan and in a hydrated state. But if you're going to do that, you're going to have to involve the jockeys. Do not just make a decision based upon anything I say or anything science says. Sit down with the people it affects the most.
But I mean, I know we haven't got long, George, but that is on the basis that it is an absolute exact science, isn't it? Because you might have a jockey who comes to you and let's just say your science tells you that his minimum weight or her minimum weight is 8 stone 7. But that jockey might be absolutely adamant that they could perform to their best at 8'5" if they were allowed to. And so you are, someone somewhere high up is telling someone what they can do with their life, even when they as an adult think that they can do something else, and they are very confident of that.
Matt, it's important I answer that question because we've got the science to show that you need a minimum amount of body fat to be healthy. Otherwise, you start getting muscle catabolism, which is the breakdown of muscle, which is bad for your immune system and brain and heart function. So what we show is that we can do a calculation where we can give you a minimum weight in a hydrated state with a minimum of 5 kilogram body fat for males, which is the lowest you see in weight-making sports, and 10 kilograms for females. Now, the science is there for that. I take your point. You're dealing with people. You're not dealing with robots. But people will always try to make lower weights. But from an athlete welfare, I'm stuck in the devil in the deep blue sea here because all I'm trying to do is improve athlete welfare. But I also live in the real world where what you're saying is that people should be responsible for their own decisions. Maybe the industry is saying, well, we've got to be shown not to condone bad weight-making practices. And
to be fair, George, you said yourself, you'd need the buy-in of the jockeys if you were to implement something like that. It's been an insight, George. Many, many thanks for your time. We could have talked to you for much, much longer. Maybe yeah. we'll chat again at some point. Thanks for your time.
OK, thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks, George. Great stuff. It's fascinating, Sean. I mean, just cutting it down to very basic levels. You see, there are people who smoke 100 cigarettes today and live to 100, and there are people who don't smoke and die of cancer at 20. So my point is that even when the science tells you to be healthy, you need this amount of water in your body or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to live a healthier life.
No, but you can't make policy based on the exceptions and the outliers. You base policy on the science, which is we know that smoking is bad for you.
Because we brought in this rule on the basis 1 or 2 people might be losing £10 a day. What we're saying is, for the people who just want to use these saunas responsibly, they should be back, and I still stick to that.
You were not paying attention. He just did a study of 70 conditional jockeys. 1 could make minimum weight in a hydrated state. 1, which means the weights need to go up. He told us how many.
Well, the weights
£4.
can go up, but that doesn't stop saunas coming back, Sean. There's nothing wrong with a sauna. In fact, I suggest after the show, you go and have one.
Well, if you join me with some birch twigs, then maybe we'll get this out of our system. Back after this.
Ooh, mate.